Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the McGowan Theater located in the National Archives building here in Washington, D.C. I'm Doug Swanson. I'm the Visitor Services Manager for the National Archives Museum, as well as the producer for the Noontime Lecture Series. Before we begin today's program, I'd just like to remind you of a few other programs that are going to be taking place at this location this week. Tomorrow, Thursday, today's the 14th, isn't it? No, today's the 13th. Tomorrow, Thursday, December 14th at noon, we'll present From the Vaults, Remembering Vietnam, with a screening of 2 short films from the National Archives motion picture holdings relating to Vietnam. These films are Hidden War in Vietnam, which was filmed in 1963, and Why Vietnam in 1965. Both of these have a running time of 30 minutes. Then to finish out the month and the year, on Friday, December 15th at noon, Professor Victor Brooks will take us back 50 years to discuss his book, 1967, The Year of Fire and Ice. It was a year of dramatic change that affected the lives of 200 million Americans in everything from support for the expanding war in Vietnam and the first Super Bowl to the beginning of the 1968 presidential campaign and the Summer of Love. A book signing will follow the program. To find out more about these and our other programs and our exhibits, please visit our website at www.archives.gov/calendar. You'll also find some printed materials about our upcoming programs in the theater lobby. Today's program is part of a series of discussions, film programs, lectures, and other events that we are presenting in conjunction with our new exhibit, Remembering Vietnam, which opened last month in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery upstairs. The exhibit is a media-rich exploration of the Vietnam War, featuring historic analysis, as well as interviews with Americans and Vietnamese veterans and civilians with firsthand experiences of the war's events. It's a fascinating collection of newly discovered and iconic original documents, images, film footage, and artifacts that illuminate 12 critical episodes in the war that divided the peoples of both the United States and Vietnam. Let's see. Our topic for today is Finally a Parade for You, a gift of gratitude for the military men and women who served our country during the Vietnam War by Molly Burton. Molly is a first-time author, and her book is a tribute and a thank you to the men and women who served in the Vietnam War. The book launched on November 11th, 2017. 8 of the veterans that she featured in the book traveled to take part in this year's annual Veterans Day Parade in Bend, Oregon. 2 of these vets served on the USS Durham and had not seen each other for 42 years. Molly is a native Oregonian, currently living in Redmond. She graduated in 1969 with a bachelor's degree in language arts and secondary education from Oregon College of Education, which is now Western Oregon College in Monmouth, Oregon. In 1980, she earned a master's degree in language arts with a minor in extreme learning problems and a standard in reading. She raised 2 sons who are both career U.S. Navy men and taught middle school English for 30 years. For the last 28 years, she's been a licensed massage therapist, a Reiki master, and is an energy healer who recently graduated from the McKay Method School of Energy Healing in Kauai, Hawaii. Please join me in welcoming Molly Burton to the National Archives.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon. It has been an honor and privilege to be asked to speak here today. Do we have any active or retired veterans in the audience? Do we have any Vietnam veterans in the audience? Do we have families of veterans in the audience? I thank you all for your service to our country. Now I'm supposed to tell a joke, and so people can take a breath and settle in to listen. So let's just pretend that I told the joke. You heard it. You can laugh, take a nice deep breath, and settle in. This is my first time to give such a speech, and the first time I've visited the area of our country's birth. Flying in over the Potomac River, history that began with people who wrote with feather quills for pens, the spectacular and haunting Vietnam Wall, all the memorials, the Washington Monument, it's huge. I feel like I'm 5 years old even being in this building. I'm filled with wonder and respect I have for the people who created this place and who continue to honor it. The people I've met here are so kind and courteous. Yesterday, a wonderful cabbie took me on the fastest tour I've ever had, just so I could take pictures. He even gave me tips about other places to visit when I returned one day as a tourist. Everyone has a story to tell. This sentence arrayed my middle school English classroom blackboard for many years. When it was time to write, I pointed to the sentence right in front of everyone. At the beginning, students did not know what to say or write. After all, telling your story is to share a piece of your heart. We don't want it hurt or injured or ridiculed. Then little pieces of their lives came forth. Pets they loved, best friends, a favorite relative, camping trips, worst vacations ever, memorable holidays, their dreams. My own story began to be revealed to me when I was literally a toddler. My dad told my brother and me and our childhood guests stories of leprechauns, fairies, and impossible little Sirocco. Echo. I grew into a child who was and is very curious about our world and worlds that may or may not be. Part of my book's dedication is to my dad. I loved learning words. In 3rd grade, I was intrigued with the dictionary. It was magic. I learned my first word, aviary, a bird sanctuary. Years later, my children's father would come home from work and tell me the boys talked and chatted, sounding just like me. They were preschoolers at the time. The years passed, and I grew. Senior year and time for high school graduation arrived. I was excited about getting out of Dodge, which at the time was my hometown, Sherwood, Oregon. Going to college and becoming a teacher, I would finally not have to do bone-cracking work in berry fields or a cannery, which supported us teens through college. Hormones and dreams kept us seniors pretty distracted. However, a few months into 1965, our modern problems teacher began telling us about the Vietnam War. Horrible stories, the draft, and what was looming for our senior boys when they turned 18. I told the teacher I didn't want my brother to go to war. He was a freshman at the time, and the teacher said it would blow over in a few months. We, innocents that we weren't really aware that the conflicts had been raging for years and would continue until 1975, though the official end of the war was 1973. To this day, many of our Vietnam veterans cannot get benefits from traumas and wounds suffered if they were doing rescue and cleanup missions after 1973, one of the many atrocities perpetrated by the government, those in charge of honoring and healing our Vietnam veterans. Indeed, if they signed up for the draft and served and were wounded or maimed, the government promised to take care of them and their families. That promise was broken a few years later when politics and expenses became a great burden. Too great. And I digress here. I was able to go to college while some of my classmates did indeed get drafted. One friend who dated a college dorm mate went to Vietnam. He and I traded little snippets of news via cassette recordings. Messages from me were not newsworthy. Speaking into the little microphone, I really didn't know what to say. That didn't sound silly or stupid. My friend came home from Vietnam, married another friend my husband and I had set up on a blind date, and he never talked about the war again. A high school classmate who had been a neighbor and a cousin were chopper pilots killed in the war. I finished college and married, began teaching and raising a family. In the late 70s and early 80s, my middle school students were wearing camo outfits to school. These weren't fashion statements. They were the actual fatigues of their fathers, brothers, uncles, and cousins. In some cases, girls wore the fatigues of mothers, aunties, and sisters. Now in the 80s and 90s, Other, newer wars were brought into our homes via real-time TV. We didn't have a chance to wait a week for cleaned-up, edited news reports like we did for Vietnam. Modern warriors weren't forgotten like the Vietnam veterans had been. My own life changed direction. My marriage dissolved, and another one was short-lived. My children finished high school. One went into the Navy right away, and one attended college for 2 years before joining the Navy as well. Both sons served on the USS Carl Vinson and were aboard ship when the attacks of 9/11 changed America forever. They spent that Christmas in the Gulf. I did not breathe or sleep well for months. Meanwhile, I met and married another man who died nearly 2 years later of lymphoma. In 1997, I met my last husband, who for 15 of our nearly 20 years together descended into dementia and Alzheimer's. He died last April. Another digression. In 1990, I became a licensed massage therapist. For 11 years, it was my expensive hobby until I retired from teaching in 2001. A perfect storm was brewing. I had been thinking about the plight of the Vietnam veterans. Stories of addiction, homelessness, alcoholism, and suicide were in the news, as well as the fact that they were never celebrated when they came home from their war. They were treated badly, or worse, treated as if they were invisible. My first book's title was born, Finally, A Parade for You. I still had no book to go with it, but the seed had been planted. In 2013, my future mentors, John and Justine Gibb, were learning about energy healing from a woman who was an amazing teacher, Bear McKay, out of Bozeman, Montana. I was the beneficiary of John and Justine's practice sessions. I knew I needed to do this work, so I began to take classes. In late 2014 and early 2015, my massage colleagues and I started giving free hand or foot massages to cancer patients receiving chemo treatments at a local clinic. One lady who chose to have a massage had her husband, caregiver, with her. He had buttons, medals, and pins on his hat announcing him as a Vietnam veteran. I asked him about his military service, and he told me my very first personal horror story about Vietnam. He watched Agent Orange fall from the sky, defoliate trees, burn shrubs and grasses, and burn holes in his uniform and on his skin. He had spots that looked like cigarette burns on his arms. These spots grow, get bumpy and flaky, then slough off, and a few weeks or months later start to grow back. This skin disorder is called chloracne. At the time, the government denied that Agent Orange could have caused this condition. My book lists 4 pages of disorders caused by Agent Orange exposure. The number has probably grown as the trauma caused by Agent Orange is so widespread and insidious. My book began to take shape. I wanted 50 stories, a very grandiose and ambitious endeavor, to say the least. I wrote an open-ended questionnaire and invited Vietnam veterans from many parts of Central Oregon and beyond, Sisters, Bend, Redmond, Prineville, Burns, and Portland. Referrals from some veterans and even my civilian clients took me to veterans at the Oregon coast, Idaho, and even Illinois and Wisconsin. Some veterans told me to check archives in the Washington, D.C. building. I replied that I wanted the whole story of soldiers' lives, not merely statistics. As a civilian, I was barred from the tightly closed circle of the fellowship of warriors. I wouldn't understand. I would judge. I might not be who I said I was. Mistrust and refusal to share were in the eyes of many. I honored and respected that. Some veterans took a chance on me, and I was honored to be privy to tales from a parallel world so different from my own. 16 Vietnam vets responded. 1 Air Force pilot, 1 Marine, and an even split between Army and Navy veterans shared their amazing tales. 1 widow whose husband died at 63 of cancer caused by Agent Orange about 7 years ago, that age being the average age of death for Vietnam veterans, remains anonymous as she's still trying to get benefits from the government. She cannot afford to be on Medicare as she doesn't make enough money at her job to support her and her grandchildren. Every penny counts. I have included a story about the Central Oregon Veterans Ranch and its founder, Allison Perry. This wonderful project is Allison's dream to provide a sanctuary for veterans, especially Vietnam veterans, to live in comfort and camaraderie as they come to the end of their lives. The ranch features a sheep herd, chickens for eggs for the ranch and public customers, and a fruit and vegetable nursery. Volunteerism is a huge part of the ranch's current success. It has been certified as an adult foster home with 4 rooms available. It simply needs the funding for staff for a year to open its doors to residents. It's a model for the rest of the country. All interviewees vetted their stories before I was finished telling them. Agent Orange exposure and PTSD and how to get help for both are essays of discussion in this book. Agent Orange damages DNA for 7 generations. Birth defects and learning problems in Vietnam veterans' children, grandchildren, and now their great-grandchildren can be direct results of Agent Orange exposure. Notice I said can be. It's never going to be proven. Even these people who helped develop it or used it in crops in our country are victims. It was used as a weed killer for crops for many years, affecting millions of civilians, only we didn't know it. At a town hall meeting at the Portland VA hospital, I learned of Agent Orange and its terrible legacy. One mom should have had 12 children. She had 2. Miscarriages were common among wives of returning Vietnam warriors. Even in Vietnam, many women were suffering miscarriages. Agent Orange was clearly the culprit, with people breathing it, drinking water contaminated with it, walking in mud or touching vegetation. It was everywhere. Our government heard the news and covered up the danger by claiming it to be communist propaganda. Fake news. 2 parents had 2 daughters. One was born before Dad went to war. One was born after Dad returned. The only DNA markers the sisters shared were that they had the same parents. No other familiar markers were present. After World War II, nuclear waste was put into cement containers and buried in the ground deeply so it wouldn't get into the water supply. Agent Orange was hauled across country by train to a warehouse in Florida and blown up, contaminating the air and ground around it. Who knows what its half-life is? Agent Orange contains dioxin. 1 molecule of dioxin will destroy and place itself into developing fetuses. Gene splays of things like phalanges, facial muscles and organs, essentials for a healthy baby, are ruined. Among other issues, it accelerates the aging process of all living creatures. PTSD, now becoming PTSS, for post-traumatic stress syndrome, is a normal human reaction to the trauma of any sort. Warriors suffer soul injury, a term coined by Deborah Grassman, national spokesman for hospice. She writes books and holds seminars about how the values of right and wrong, good and bad, are turned upside down, wounding the souls of warriors. Through counseling with several easy techniques, these souls can be healed. 2 little examples. Don't even know I'm lying, an acronym for denial. 2, just open yourself, an acronym for joy. I just finished my own training in energy healing, and as Douglas said, graduated on December 4th. My graduate project was research about how PTSD, now PTSS, can be alleviated with the use of energy healing. My subjects included 1 Vietnam veteran, 2 Afghanistan veterans, 2 spouses of veterans, and 3 civilians. To a person, they felt more relaxed, calmer, and less charged about the stresses of life in general after each of 5 sessions. 3 subjects are continuing treatment as paying clients. Energy healing is not like taking an aspirin and in 20 minutes feeling better. Rather, over time, one has a general sense of well-being. Pre- and post-emotional state surveys in my study had to be done before counseling and quickly after the treatment for each of the sessions, as simply talking about an issue as they bubbled up began the disintegration of the trauma. Time is a key factor, as this work is like peeling back the layers of an onion. It can be scary to reveal hurt to oneself and to another. And in some cases, the question becomes, who am I without my trauma? Guilt, anger, sadness are heavy burdens to carry. This book contains much pain, fear, and unspeakable horror. It also contains healing, love, and redemption. Contact information for me was not included in the final cut of the book, so if you go to info@themckaymethod.com, you can read my research paper. You may contact me for energy healing sessions via mkburton777@gmail.com. It is possible and very effective to do this work long distance. Leave your name and phone number, and I will contact you for further information. In an update for this book's launch date, I'll share the following. On Veterans Day, November 11th, several towns in Central Oregon, as all across the country, presented Veterans Day parades. I, with the help of many others, including Ben's Band of Brothers, hosted by Lyle Hicks, owner of Jake's Diner, and one of the warriors in my book, helped to get 6 of the featured soldiers and some of their families to Central Oregon for a reunion and participation in the Veterans Day Parade. Again, Lyle and Ed Zier, another soldier in the book, had not seen each other for 40 years, and they were just gabbing like this the whole time. The day was glorious. The crowd included thousands, and as we rounded one corner with multitudes waving and clapping, one veteran remarked, "This is the way our parade should have been and now is." My heart was filled. Though many could not attend the festivities for various reasons, their spirits rode with us. At our 2 book signings, I had the men sign their own stories. Laughing and chatting with each other, they gave me a glimpse of the 18-year-old boys they had once been, like they were signing each other's yearbooks at school. One veteran caught my eye and said, "Your dad would have been proud of you." I teared up, and he responded by saying, "That's the response I expected." It is one of my dreams to have this book in every home, school, and library. Follett Company is a publisher and distributor of books for schools and libraries worldwide, and it has picked up this book. I'm only a small part of the tail of the comet on which master storyteller Ken Burns rides. His amazing work is truly archival material. A single humble civilian, I delved into the lives of a few people who represent all veterans of all wars. These people are our friends, families, neighbors, and co-workers. When I retrieved my investment of getting this book written, it is one of my dreams to provide half of my sales profits for the betterment of veterans' lives, especially the Vietnam veterans. They are dying at the rate of 290 a day. The number may be greater now. One of the major causes is suicide. My daily work consists of helping civilians and now veterans through massage and energy healing, one client at a time. I offer a military discount for active and retired veterans and their spouses. It is a small but personal contribution to the care and healing of those who sacrifice their lives for us all. This presentation is only a part of my story. If we are to tell our stories, we connect with ourselves and each other. It is a way of energetically holding hands. If we are holding hands, we cannot hurt each other or ourselves. And if hurt is not possible, what is left is joy, love, and peace. Thank you. I understand that now is the time for Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please use one of the microphones on this side or that side of the auditorium. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you for your time.
Folks, before you leave, if I could just